G'day everyone to another episode of NatCon Australia. Today I'm delighted to welcome John Ruddick, who is an Australian politician. He is the Libertarian member of the New South Wales Legislative Council. He's been in there since April 2023, the first member of that party to be elected to the New South Wales Parliament. Before entering Parliament, John was a senior member of the Liberal Party in New South Wales and is the author of 2008 book, How to Make the Liberal Party Great Again. Welcome, John.
Dan, thanks very much for having me. Good to see you, mate.
No worries. Hey, so we're on the eve of the US presidential election. And what's been striking to me as that has gone along, well, amongst other things, it's been a crazy ride, is the way that people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Tulsi Gabbard and a whole Joe Rogan, who just endorsed Donald Trump, people that have a strong libertarianish bent to them, have come together to get Donald Trump across the line, or at least trying to get Donald Trump across the line. In Australia, by contrast, we tend to split off into our different subcategories, right? The Liberal Party tries to include, the Liberal and National Party tried to include different types, conservatives, libertarians, but at the moment, at least, we have a profusion of micro parties on the right. How do you think in Australia that spectrum of kind of ideology should work together structurally?
Well, okay, look, there's a few points that need to be made. The first is that we do have, unlike in America, we do have proportional representation in our upper houses and in the Senate. So it does mean that a political party, a minor political party, can have a major influence. The most influential party this century in Australia has been the Greens. Now, they've capped out at about 10-12%. They even went back in your home state of Queensland recently. But they've been at about 10 or 12%, give or take a little bit, for a good 10 years. Now, but because that 10 to 12% gives them a lot of senators, a lot of members of our upper houses. And what that does is it applies pressure to the Labor Party to not go too centrist, or they'll be fearful that the Greens will keep sniping at their left-wing base. So that's dragged the Labor Party to the left. And in the process, that has dragged the Liberal Party to the left because the centre has moved to the left. And that's because we do not have a right-wing, ideological, intellectual, purist minor party on the right. Now, we've got lots of little parties that are trying, okay, and one of them is going to break through, and I believe that's going to be the Libertarian Party in the next few years. A similar thing happened in New Zealand over the last 10 years, where they used, if you went back in time 10 years ago, they have a very proportional representation system of government. It's not even Westminster anymore. And that rewards, if you get a percentage of the vote, you get the same amount of seats in their 120 unicameral parliament. Now, if we go back in time 10 years ago, there was lots of little minor parties on the right. And what has happened now is, after the terrible Jacinda Ardern lost the last, or her party, the Labor Party, lost their last election, they've had a national party come to government. And the national party is like our Liberal Party, just a mainstream centre-right party, lacking backbone like our Liberal Party. But they're now in cabinet in coalition with two minor parties on the right. Now, the dominant one of them is the ACT Party, which is like the equivalent of the Libertarian Party. They're a out loud and proud Libertarian Party, and it's turning out to be. And the other one is the Winston Peters sort of nationalist party, okay, but which is in decline. And the Libertarian Party is being a very good influence on this New Zealand government. And so we believe that what is going to happen over the next few years is the Libertarian Party is going to emerge as the dominant party on the minor right. And then when the Liberal Party and the National Party come to government in the future, hopefully they will be dependent on our support. And we'll say, yes, we're going to vote for you over the Labor Party to form government, but there's going to be conditions about cutting the public service, about encouraging more laissez-faire capitalism, fixing up our immigration system, and lots of good things that the Liberal Party and the National Party are too weak to champion at the moment.
Right. It's a slightly different strategy though to what you outlined in the Make the Liberal Party Great Again. I mean, for example, I think one of the solutions you proposed was a more competitive US-style primary system for seat selection in the Liberal Party, right? Back in the day. Do you think that's no longer a useful means for change, or it might be, but it should be work in complement with the strategy you just outlined for the Libertarian Party?
Well, okay, so I still have lots of friends in the Liberal Party, and the people that are championing democratic reform in the Liberal Party, I absolutely wish them all the best. Okay. And the book, Make the Liberal Party Great Again, which had a sexy name to it, and it did quite well, but it really was a manual on constitutional reform, okay, which is not a book for everybody, but it is for people who want to sort of fix up Australian politics. Now, what we were arguing is that, yes, the lower house candidates for the Liberal Party should be chosen via a primary style system. So it means, so I live here on the North Shore of Sydney. My federal electorate is Warringah, the amazing teal queen bee, Zali. And but so the Liberal Party has to choose a candidate on how to, they've got to come up with a mechanism to pick their candidate. Well, I say that they should, everybody in Warringah who is prepared to identify as a Liberal Party person, Liberal Party, they don't have to be a member, but they can just say, look, I'm a supporter. I usually vote Liberal. That's all we want. They can sign a stat dec or something. Then they will get to vote on who the Liberal candidate's going to be. Now, I imagine about 10% of the electorate will turn out. We know that because that's roughly what happens in America. And we've actually had primaries in this state in the National Party and in the Labor Party. And about 10% of the electorate turns out. So 10% of them really care who the Liberal candidate's going to be, or in the other cases, the National Party and the Labor Party. Now, those parties shut that process down, not because it didn't work, but because the party bosses couldn't choose who the candidates were going to be. So that's why they shut that down. Now, what I proposed in the book was candidates should be chosen via a primary. Now, if there's a primary, what will happen, particularly in seats that Liberal Party is expected to win, there will be a fierce battle of ideas. There will be public debate, and people will say, vote for me to be the Liberal candidate for Warringah because I believe we should privatise the ABC. I believe we should have a 5-year immigration pause, or what the hell ever. You can get up there and say, you think transgender rights are fantastic. Whatever. We have a debate and someone wins. So it's going to engage people, and you can only win that nomination by having the majority support of the base voters. That's a good thing. So that was part of the reform. The second part of the reform of the book outlined was that we have to choose our Senate candidates and our upper house candidates. It's very different to the US, because when they have a primary to select, say, a Senate candidate in, say, Texas, they're just choosing one candidate to be the Senate candidate for the Republican Party. But in Australia, under our constitution, the party's got to choose up to 6 candidates for a Senate position and up to about 15 for the upper house. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, what I propose there is that there should be a low membership fee, like $20. To join the Liberal Party now, I think it's $100, $120, something like that. I say let's have a low membership fee, $25, which is what the Canadian Conservatives do, and they've got 700,000 members because they do what I'm suggesting. But to choose our upper house and Senate candidates, every person who's become a financial member of the party at a low cost gets to have a vote on who the Senate and the upper house candidates are. So this would all again result in true believers, generally speaking, right-wing candidates would win the battle, but not always, depending upon the seat, etc. But then the mother of reforms and the primary, the guts of the book was that the Liberal Party membership, and again, they could join for $20 or something, gets to vote who the state and federal parliamentary leaders are. Now, all those other reforms are good, okay, but the nation-changing reform would be if everyone in Australia knows if they pay $25, they can have a choice about who the leader of the opposition in this case is going to be. Okay, and if that was a battle, say, between Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott, if all the members got to have a say, Tony Abbott would have won 85%. Turnbull wouldn't have even contested. right? That's the reform that's going to change. Now, I was going to dedicate 10 years of my life to agitate to bring about that reform. I knew Scott Morrison wouldn't be supportive of it. So I thought, I'll wait him out. He won't be Prime Minister forever. But then that was in 2018. I said, this will take me 10 years. And that was the goal. But then, of course, we had the COVID lockdowns. We had Paris climate sellout. We had $1 trillion worth of debt. So I thought, 3 strikes and you're out, Liberal Party. You're beyond redemption. I hope I'm wrong. I hope these reforms can come in one day, but I have to put my political energy into the party that I've been voting for the last 10 years, which was the Libertarian Party.
So, but let me just push back on this, and this might seem boring to some, but I think it's useful for us to talk about it rather than the big ideological stuff, because we both understand party structures probably more than some of the other guests you've had. I can see advantages in having an open primary for selecting local candidates to represent the party in Warringah, like you say, and a much more open primary process for selection of Senate candidates. Selection of the parliamentary leader, as they have done in the UK, and as they have done doesn't seem to me always to lead to the best results. And I mean, they had the recent election where Kemi Badenoch in the UK, where Kemi Badenoch was elected, and there was another guy who missed out. I think John Howard, of all people, said that the problem with selecting your parliamentary leader through the members selecting it is, you might not have got a Margaret Thatcher instead of a Ted Heath, because he was much well known. You don't think he could, because isn't there something slightly correct?
John Howard is opposed to this reform, okay? And John Howard has been wrong on many, many things. Disarming us, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, middle-class welfare, and he's also wrong, and he's been wrong on Liberal Party reform. Now, he loves the Westminster system. Okay, let's go through the Westminster system. The Labor Party in Britain, the Conservative Party in Britain, the Liberal Democrats in Britain, the Scottish National Party in Britain, or choose their parliamentary leader through a ballot of the membership. What about in Canada? Well, it's exactly the same thing, and that's a key part of the book. Now, even the stupid Labor Party in this country has brought in the first step in this direction. Now, it's a convoluted, messed up system, right, where the party room still has a 50% say. Okay, so the Liberal Party is really the last standout, and it's going to come about. Okay,
But why not have a much more open primary, where public open primary, as opposed to sort of something where you can't actively campaign for at the seat level, but keep the traditional system where the party members, representatives, elect the leader to me, that at the moment it seems as though they've, in the UK and elsewhere, they haven't allowed for open primaries like you have in the US, but they've instead adopted this sort of system where part of the parliamentary party vote and part of the membership vote, right? What wouldn't it be better to start off with open primaries for seats? Like, I think the US used to be quite clubby in who they're selected as their representatives back in the day, and then they did open it up, and you do get these exciting, contests for who will be the congressional member for New Hampshire. There was a video the other day with some Chinese lady handing some stuck-up person her backside. I mean, so the UK have done the leadership, but they haven't actually done the open primaries. Wouldn't it be better to start at the open primary level first?
Well, look, they're both fantastic reforms. So it's just let's hope they can bring it about. They're both good. Now, in terms of John Howard says, Margaret Thatcher wouldn't have got up. Well, it was the Thatcherite party, the Thatcherite faction of the party, which championed this reform. So Howard is simply ignorant on this issue. Okay, after Thatcher got rolled by the stupid party room in 1990, and the Thatcherites were so cranky about it because they said the membership loves her. So they were the people that brought in these reforms. Thank you, Mr. Howard. Now, what we saw in Canada recently, Mr. Poulevé, I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but a great man. He's going to be the next Prime Minister. He's going to be a great Prime Minister. He comes out and he says, let's privatise their equivalent of the ABC. That's pretty right-wing. Tony Abbott never had the balls to say that. He says global warming is BS. He says COVID vaccines are BS. Oh, this is pretty good. Do you think the party room would ever pre-select somebody like that? They had 700,000 members of the Canadian Conservative Party because everyone wanted to come and vote for him. And he won easily. The party room wouldn't have chosen him. The party room, Dan, is massively conflicted for this reason. Let's say Peter Dutton decides to retire tomorrow and become, spend time with the family, whatever. And there's going to be, we need to choose an opposition leader. The Liberal Party does. How do they do that? Well, the National Party aren't invited to that party room meeting. Okay, the LNP is sort of, some of them can, some of them can't. It's weird. But 100 men and women in Canberra, behind a closed door, will go and say, who's going to be someone who's a coin flip to be the next Prime Minister of a pretty impressive country called Australia. It's a very important decision. Now, out of those 100 people that are going to make that decision, about a third of them, roughly, are going to end up a front bencher, and 2/3 of them will not end up a front bencher after that process. So people go into that room and they're thinking, well, maybe they'd think, Tony Abbott, listen, if we go back in time to Abbott versus Turnbull, people would have gone to that party room thinking, Abbott's probably better for this country. Turnbull's a bit of a left-wing commie on so many things. But Turnbull's promised me Minister for Defence. Or Turnbull's promised to look after my pre-selection if he's the leader. Okay, or Turnbull's promised to give my wife a job if he's the Prime Minister on some board, on the ABC board or something, right? It's heavily conflicted. It's all crap, right? So these people are not voting for what's in the national interest, not even in the interest of the party. They're doing what's in their personal interest. Now, if Canada with a population of 42, 43 million can have 700,000 people join the party, and Canada is Australia's constitutional twin, okay, people think we copied the American and the British Constitution in the 1890s. No. We just cut and paste the Canadian Constitution. It's a very good constitution. Thank you, Canada. We are the same country, except that we're cold. We're hot, they're cold. We've got the same economy. We've got monarchs, we've got states, we've got bicameral parliament, English speaking, same country, okay? And the Canadians can get 700,000 people to join their party because they felt that their leadership contests go for 5 months in the Canadian Conservative Party and the Canadian Liberal Party and the other little party they have over there. It goes that they have TV debates. They have about 10 TV debates. They have a spending cap of about $5 million. Okay, it's a big campaign, big serious campaign. You've got to get up on TV and say, vote for me to be the leader of the Canadian Conservative Party because I'm going to abolish the equivalent of the ABC. I think global warming's BS. Well, that sounds pretty good to me. And so that's now how many would join in Australia if Canada can get 700? 500,000. 500,000 Australians will say, yeah, bloody oath, I'll pay my $25. I'll have a say on this. I care about it. They don't care that much about who their Senate candidates are going to be. The hardcore true believers do. That might be 50,000. But 500,000 people will join up. They'll say, yeah, if I can pay my $25 and I don't have to do anything else, but I get to have a vote, the only people going to pay the $25 are people who care. And if 500,000 people voting, they can't be corrupted. You can't go and buy off 500,000 people, can you? So I'll give you a job and you a job. Well, there's 500,000 people you need, right? So that's the great reform. So we've got two forms of attack to make Australia, to turn Australia around. We're at about a 56% taxation rate when you add up local, state, and federal taxes. We're heading towards socialism. The Liberal Party is weak. The Labor Party is getting more and more Bernie Sanders style. So there's two styles. First strategy is let's make the Libertarian Party a 10 to 12% purist, intellectual, ideological party that doesn't give an inch. And at the same time, let's hope that our dear friends in the Liberal Party can champion these type of democratic reforms. Yeah.
So I fully agree that the party networks on both sides of the traditional parties, at least, are very moribund, and whatever can be done to rejuvenate them is a great thing. In the US, you've got this Donald Trump character that came out of nowhere, and whatever you think about him, certainly captivating kind of personality. But he also has brought into the Republican Party a very new ideological framework. I think J.D. Vance said it quite well on Joe Rogan recently. He said when he got to Washington, there's nothing that would set off the consensus more across the aisle than differing views on trade, immigration, and foreign policy. And to me, they're the three big ones that on the Liberal Party side of things, they have not changed since 2004. They still think neoliberal, neoconservative interventionist foreign policy, open borders trade with China, no tariffs on manufactured goods coming in here. And while strong on, much more successful than the United States in stopping illegal immigration, essentially in favor of mass immigration. If not, more people are born overseas in New South Wales and in Sydney than are born in overseas in any major metropolitan US city. You're kind of some favorable to some of those change in position and not others. So let's start with the most favorable one. Foreign policy. Libertarians have always been much more skeptical about going to war to, in far-flung corners of the globe to create democracy and here, there, and everywhere. That's right. Right. That's and so that arm of the sort of Trump new three-legged stool is something that accords with you guys. Do you think there's scope for moving the dial on through the Libertarian, of the Liberal Party of Australia on that? Are we still going to continue to go and fund wars here, there, and everywhere to change the world? Because I don't get any sense that there has been any change of thinking from them on that.
Well, there's no policy creativity coming out of the Liberal Party because it's so moribund, because it's not democratic. Okay. Now, what you're saying, so they need a ginger group on the right, an intellectual purist group called Open Libertarians. Now, I often tell people who are saying, what's the Libertarian Party, John? And I say, okay, one easy way to describe it is say, look, we're basically a purist version of the Liberal Party that doesn't give an inch, but we've got a couple of pretty serious differences. The first is we are instinctively anti-war. Okay, whereas the stupid Liberal Party always thinks, well, if Britain's off to war and America's off to war, we're there. And the thinking is, oh, well, one day we'll get invaded and our mates will come and help us out. And they can look at the 1940s to show, well, that worked out. Now, but the Libertarians look at war, and we believe that in 90% of cases, it was a political war that turned into a bloody war. Okay, it was just two egomaniac politicians going crazy. World War I was the greatest disaster in human history because there was no purpose to that war. We just stumbled into it. It wasn't the people wanted a war, the silly political leaders wanted a war. The monarchs didn't want a war. It was the parliaments and the prime ministers that said, oh no, and the generals, let's go to war. Whatever, I don't know, let's just go to war. And it gave us World War II and everything else. We look at war as, we're so suspicious of government. That's why we want a very, very small government. But we see a big government as a bad government, and the worst big government is a government that wants to go to war. Okay, and so yes, we are instinctively opposed to war. And now Trump has arrived at this position, not intellectually, but just because he's a businessman and a family, just likes to create things. He likes to build things. He wants to get along well with people. He hasn't thought about it that much. He just thinks, why can't we have good relations with Russia? Why can't we sort of try and sort things out? So, yes, we are more purist than this on Trump, but this is one of the reasons why we love Donald Trump. Well, I certainly do, and many libertarians do, not all. And that's because he's just got a hell of a lot of common sense. I get the impression Donald Trump has read many books in his life. That's okay. He's been building beautiful buildings. He's been dealing with, you've got to be a pretty smart guy to be a successful property developer in Manhattan. So we like his instincts, and on this instinct, he's very, very good.
Well, he's been consistent for a long time. The Iraq War, he says, is one of the greatest disasters that we've been engaged in recent times, and that's very different to what Tony Abbott and John Howard continue to say about that and Afghanistan and everything else in the post Cold War era, which is when utopianism in foreign policy really took flight. On immigration, you, at least personally, and I don't think it's yet been adopted as a formal libertarian position, but you're much more skeptical of mass immigration, right? Which doesn't neatly sit well with the no borders libertarian view of the world. How do you reconcile a more restrictionist immigration policy with libertarianism?
Look, my hunch is I would like a 5-year pause on immigration with very, very few exceptions. Okay, that's my hunch. Okay, now the party, I want to walk you through what the party's about to come out with, which is quite an innovative policy. Now the really purist libertarians actually can make a very good case for a world with no government, no state coercion. They basically say that the government is simply the gang with the most amount of weapons, and they distort things, and we can have a lot of voluntary cooperation and private contracts, and we can actually do everything a lot better, roads and hospitals and everything else. Okay, these are the people called anarcho-capitalists. Okay, and I'm very sympathetic towards the anarcho-capitalists. And they would say, well, in that world, we don't need immigration restrictions, firstly because there won't be a government, but there'll be a hell of a lot of private property rights. Okay, so if you happen to sort of, if you want to restrict people, well, that's as a property owner, and you can cooperate with nearby property owners. If you want to restrict people, well, it's entirely up to you. Okay, now, but we're a long way away from that ideal, and it may not even be perfect. We may need, the optimal might be to get the government down to say 5% of GDP, not 0% of GDP, but we're at 56% now, so we can have that debate when we get there. Now with the immigration, I think what the party's going to come out with is a policy that looks something like this. We would get 100% out of any refugee UN obligations, which I think we take in 15 to 20,000 a year. These are not people Australia chooses; these are people the UN chooses. And we've been very generous since World War II. Been the third most generous country on earth, behind Canada and the United States, of course, maybe England. But and we're thinking, look, too many people coming in, and we need to have a breather. And the politicians are bringing them in so they can say, oh, we're not in a recession. We're not in a recession. Okay, so many people. Okay, the per capita, we are in a per capita recession, but that doesn't make the headlines. But that's more important. So what we would do is what I think the party's going to come out with the federal election is, we're going to say something like this. It should be employer driven. So I was up at the mid-north coast of New South Wales a weekend or two ago, and they said to me, there's so many people want to come and live here. Prices are going up. We could build, so many new homes, but we just can't find the builders. Okay, so we would say to the local property developers, we'll say, look, if you pay, say, $80,000 to the government, you can, and you need someone with a particular type of skill set, you go and choose them. They might be in Russia, they might be in Bulgaria, they might be in Brazil, they might be in Botswana. You go and choose them, but you've got to pay $80,000. They're not going to muck it. They're going to be very careful about who they get. There's going to be a real commercial need that person in Australia. And we, at the moment, migrants come in under a silly points test. So it's giving us a lot of doctors and highly qualified people end up being Uber drivers. So under our free market system, we'd say if you're an employer, you might be an engineering company, and you might be having an opportunity to really grow your business. And you might want to you might need a particular type of engineer, and there might be 3 of them in Japan. And you say, okay, I need these Japanese engineers out here. They're fantastic. They're going to make, if I employ them, it's going to make my business worth $1 million more. So they're going to think, well, I'll pay the 80 grand for that. So it's going to be free market driven. And then what we can do is then we say to anyone that comes here under this system, you're not a citizen for 10 years. You don't get any welfare for 10 years, and you commit a crime. See you later. Go back home. Now, this would be we are then only going to be bringing people into Australia under this system who will make Australia stronger and richer.
So it's essentially indentured labour for 10-year period where they don't get Australian citizenship rights, and there's no restriction on where they come from, or it's a pure economic, based on purely economic need and justification that determines what they get.
The answer to your question is yes. Now, but let's think about how that would unfold in the real world. People are going to want someone in their company who is a good cultural fit, aren't they? They're not going to want to bring out somebody who's going to, spend their weekends marching down the street talking about the politics of the failed country that they left. Okay, so now, will some mistakes be made under this system? Yes, no system's perfect. But a lot more mistakes are being made under the current system. Okay, now it has been explained to me that if we have a 5-year pause, that is going to cause a lot of bottlenecks, a lot of problems. I mean, you might have a 22-year-old Australian girl, nice, pretty girl from Brisbane. She goes and studies in Canada for a year or two. She falls in love with a very nice Canadian guy. They want to come back to Australia and start a family and grow a business. All good things. Go to church if they want to. Join the Libertarian Party if they want to. But good people, if we had a 5-year pause, well, that person can't come here. So then those people will be lost to Canada. So having a 5-year pause sounds good, okay? And it is sort of in my instinct what we bloody well need, okay? But, you know, and look, there might be some businessman. There might be a billionaire from Switzerland. And he might say to himself, I want to go and live in Australia for 3 years, and I'm going to invest $100 million and I'm going to employ 10,000 people. Well, that's fantastic. Well, if we had a 5-year pause, we'd have to say to him, go to Canada, you know, go to Belgium. You're not coming to Australia because we've got a 5-year immigration pause. So sounds good. And I was the one who has been promoting it. But when you think about it, but look, the guts of it is right. Okay, we've got a massive problem with the level of immigration coming in at the moment and whether they are making Australia better or not.
Yeah. So I mean, you can have a pause with exceptions for the lovely married couple from the Canadian fiance, who or whatever the example was, but a serious pause because is a simpler solution, right? Rather than a convoluted sort of process points-based system where you allow in some rich person because he wants to come and live in Australia, and rather than having it necessarily any close ties. I mean, to me, it's like I always like to use historical analogies, right? And it'd be like, well, you know, King Darius wants to go and live in Athens because he's rich. Let's let him in. Well, he's not actually Greek, so why? On what basis should he form part of the polis? You know, it doesn't. To me, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. You know, I think. Well, the conservative. Yep.
If Darius wanted to turn up, if he wanted to renounce his throne in Persia, and he wanted to turn up with 1,000 camels loaded up with gold, because he says, "Look, I really like Greece," and he's going to bring all his gold there. Well, I think that's a good idea.
Well, it just depends what you think a nation is, right? Is it an economic sphere, or is it more than? And is it a bundle of particular liberal axioms, or is it actually more than that? Is a culture? Is it a people? Is it tradition that one can graft people onto slowly at the edges over time in a careful way? You know, carefully done, which hasn't been done in the West over the last 50 plus years. Or do you just not care, as provided they make an economic contribution in some sense, they become Australian from the moment they receive their piece of paper? I don't know. I feel like that we've reduced the value of citizenship in Australia. And as you would know, right? I mean, in Australia, there's a shorter waiting period to become an Australian citizen than probably anywhere in most places in the world. My brother, who was, lived in Switzerland for ages, good luck trying to become Swiss in a hurry. You've got to, demonstrate you learn the language, be accepted by the local canton and all the rest of it, and kind of be voted in. Very, very strict ability. Now, Switzerland isn't, it's not an international pariah, but it takes its sense of nationhood, I think, a lot more seriously than Australia does. So what's wrong with a much more, why not? We've really pushed the foot to the floor for the last 30, 40 years on mass immigration. What's wrong with a much more restrictive approach? Why does is that defend libertarian principles so much that it can't be somehow integrated into what you guys?
Well, we're suspicious of a government trying to engineer a culture. We do believe that culture is important, and a sense of community is important, and we believe that is best manufactured, best something that arises spontaneously from the people, and it will. Every human society has evolved its own culture. Now, you know what? I'll give you an example. This is something that's been coming into Australia recently, which I don't like very much. Halloween. When I was a kid, Halloween was something you saw in American sitcoms, and we just didn't do it in Australia. I can tell you, it's a big deal now, Dan. The little kids, they absolutely love it. Okay, and this was not something where we had a department of, cultural affairs say, oh, we're going to have Halloween. This is something that did spontaneously arise. So since the people are enjoying it, not my cup of tea, okay, but this is something that's happened in Australia. It's pretty much all around Australia now. You can go to any suburb in Sydney, they're doing Halloween. This is something that just happened. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And of course, culture will, of course, always evolve and change. And, but then religion can sort of underpin things. But all these things will happen in a good way, in a natural way, if we don't have a big bossy state trying to set our culture.
Yeah, I suppose
we would have a conservative culture. We would mostly have a conservative culture, a socially conservative culture, if the government didn't meddle. Now, in a big city like Sydney or Brisbane, there's going to be your new towns. There's going to be a bohemian section, and that's okay. That's okay. You're going to have Fortitude Valley in Brisbane. You're going to have some areas where there's lots of rainbow people. Okay, lots of and that's what's naturally going to happen. We can't. We don't want to stamp that out. We want to let that naturally, spontaneously do its thing, but I think it'll be very small. It'll be a narrow little section.
Yeah, I guess you'd say, just to rebut it very quickly, Halloween comes from a Western tradition. It was more prominent in the United States, but it has European antecedents. And does it matter if we do a bit of street Halloween here in Australia compared to some other much more dramatic sort of cultural changes that have occurred in particular suburbs? They're not really like and like. But moving on, the other big one where Trump has certainly been very clear on, and indeed the traditional Liberal Party was very clear on, but has changed their mind, is on trade. But the Libertarians, you would break out in rashes at the talk of tariffs and restrictions on anything other than 0% tariffs on goods coming in from wherever, right? Or is there more scope for a reassessment on trade within libertarian circles these days?
The whole world will be better off if there's no trade barriers. We'll be less likely to go to war if there's no trade barriers. Okay, that said, Trump's talking about erecting a trade tariff around America. Now, and there would be an equal reduction in income tax if that happened. Okay, well, that's not the end of the world. A 10% tax and a reduction in income tax. A tariff is simply a tax. All taxes create disincentives to whatever's being taxed. Now you are right that Australia at the Federation period was a pro-tariff party. New South Wales was very reluctant to join the Federation because they were a proudly free market, free trade state. And there was some concession. And Sydney, the city of Sydney, the most famous part of Australia around the world, twice voted no. We don't want to join the Federation. Okay. New South Wales on the second attempt did vote yes. It was still narrow. It was the border states like Albury and Tweed Heads and Tenterfield that said, "Oh no, we want this federation because we don't like the other states putting stupid tariffs on them." Okay. Now, but Sydney has, and Melbourne was, you know that Melbourne, about 90% of people in Victoria voted for federation. So they are, Sydney and Melbourne at face value look very so similar.
Yeah,
so
no, I had a long discussion with this historian from the Robert Menzies Institute, and indeed John Roscombe and other people about this thing. I think actually there's this, we talk about the black armband view of history on the left, but I think on the right, there's a tendency to go, yeah, we're all doing great in Australia until federation, Australian settlement, and we had 70 dark years until gradually we came out into the light in the 70s and became more liberal. You recognize that because it is a tendency, right? And I think, and I know we're a little bit pressed for time, but there is a tendency amongst liberals and libertarians not to really understand, in my view at least, nationhood. What is required to bring a nation together, both in trade, immigration, and in foreign policy. And since, in the post-World War, well, America sort of lost that idea too. It was just an idea, America. It wasn't actually a place with a people and a tradition passing on from one generation to the next. Nations are just bundles of liberal axioms. A Frenchman can be Italian provided they believe in freedom of speech, or vice versa. I don't know how it actually works in practice, but what do you, to finish up, what does a libertarian think of nationhood? How can those two things be reconciled? because if you don't have borders and you don't have any, and it doesn't matter whether people come and go and this, that, and the other, as long as they live.
I've rejected any idea that we don't believe in borders. So we do believe in borders. Okay. And we can tolerate it. We can tolerate some type of a tariff. It's dumb, but if there's a corresponding reduction in other taxes, then whatever. I think America is different with tariffs because America is so huge and there's so many different industries and services and everything else. Now, Australia here, the best countries to trade with are countries that are A, nearby, and B, very, very different to you. So here we are, a European country, right in the middle of Asia, or not the middle of Asia, but right on the doorstep of Asia. And Asia's got 45 countries or something. They're all very, very different. So free trade for us here in Australia has helped us make us a very wealthy country. Okay, now, in terms of nationhood, look, of course we believe in nationhood. Of course we believe in a good culture. Of course we believe in good social values. But the question is, do we want this imposed by the most heavily armed state out there, which is called the government? We don't believe in coercion. We believe that people like yourselves and many of you good viewers should be trying to inculcate a good spirit of national identity spontaneously without having to rely on laws and people, politicians and bureaucrats backed up by guns. That's the only place where we differ, and I'm right and you're wrong.
Awesome. Hey, John, I know we're short for time. I really appreciate you coming on. You're always full of ideas and knowledge about the way the system actually works and practical ways that you think change can be brought about. You're not someone to sit on your hands and wonder. So I enjoyed our discussion and look forward to catching up with you in future, and hope viewers took some interesting insights from exchange. Take it easy, mate.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to doing it again. Thank you.
See ya. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.